Does anyone remember having watched School Days? Well, I certainly remembered having played the visual novel as well as reading the manga, but the anime I didn't really remember. Of course, there are certain parts that I did remember, like the most notable things, but I honestly didn't recall exactly what had happened. So I took the time to binge everything all in one setting without any breaks. Is it just as bad as we all remember it, or do we just have some kind of stigma with this show? Essentially, is it a meme show like Boku no Pico or Kiss X Sis? School Days was an animated series that was made by Studio TNK. Now, that studio might ring a bell for you actually, and that's because they actually made High School DxD, Iki 1000, and a bunch of other shows. School Days originated as an eroge visual novel game that actually came out in April of 2005. Seeing as how the 20th anniversary of the visual novel was coming around, I kind of had my interest peaked specifically because of this. The studio Overflow actually has a bunch of spin offs and sequels of School Days, including a remaster called School Days HQ. They also made Summer Days, Cross Days, Shiny Days, Island Days, and Strip Battle Days too. That is a whole lot of days in just an 11-year span. The visual novel actually followed the typical good and bad choices impacting the game. But what separated it from other VNs was the fact that the bad ends were actually bad endings. This is what the series became notorious for, as the endings were truly remarkable with deaths and crazy shit happening. However, it's important to note that even in School Days 1, there's only 5 bad endings compared to the 21 good endings that are in the visual novel. As for the basis or creation of the series, creator Mathers Numakichi actually said that it was based off of the beginning of the movie Fargo. One thing that actually revolutionized visual novels was specifically that School Days actually used animation and voice acting to kind of work with the VN medium. This was not typical as of this time, with visual novels not really having that kind of budget or support for music or that kind of thing in this genre for 2005. Due to the content in the game, Studio Overflow actually had a really hard time trying to find a space to promote the game. After being released in 2005, though, it didn't really get impacted by that lack of promotion, as Getchu.com, a distributor for visual novels, actually stated that it was the #1 sold game for the first half of 2005. These sales helped inspire the fact that there was a manga created with 5 and 7 chapters, respectively, within Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the manga. What's important to note here is that in visual novels, there's a bunch of branched forks or different stories that can be told. Within a manga or anime medium, there's only really one story that you can tell. You can try and incorporate things that were in the visual novel, but you can't have the same ending from every different ending. There's just one path that you can naturally end at, which is actually what kind of happens with the manga and anime having completely different endings. So to quickly touch base on what happens in the manga, I'm just going to state it right now. The first volume actually goes pretty much in line with what happens in the anime, but it kind of deviates when it goes into the second volume. Some notable differences are the fact that instead of going to a beach like they do in the manga, in the anime they go to a water park. This is where our protag, Makoto, kind of romances Sakai right here. In the anime, it happens a little bit before this as they try to do sexual training, whatever that means. Another notable difference within the manga from the anime is the fact that the confrontation between Katsura and Sakai is way more quick. Also, there's a major difference in the fact that Makoto only really cheats with Sakai in the manga, whereas in the anime, he's a horn dog that fucks anything that moves. This is a very clear difference as it shows that it's just a love triangle between Makoto, Sakai, and Katsura. With this, you're not feeling so aggravated and agitated with ROP, and you can kind of read the manga without throwing it away and being like, fuck this, I'm dropping it. So the manga does a really important thing with you having empathized with Makoto and Sakai in their affair, rather than Makoto going around and doing whatever the fuck he wants with whomever. The key difference is the ending of the manga compared to the anime. The confrontation is still the same, with Katsura and Sakai meeting each other on the roof and trying to fight over Makoto. But it's what happens in this fight that actually deviates what happens between the manga and anime, with Katsura attacking and accidentally striking Makoto with a knife. Now, you might think that this is just, okay, the ending right here, but actually Makoto is taken to the hospital where we see that he's getting his injuries treated. And this is where the big twist of this manga comes into play, with Sakai actually attacking Katsura and trying to kill her. Makoto gets kind of rambled on by Sakai, who's having a psychotic break and saying that they'll be together forever because he's taking out the competition. Again, there's some similarities between these two endings, but they're completely different from a contextual perspective. If anything, the anime is more so like the visual novel, with most of the stuff kind of looking and performing like a VN. It shows how he goes through several different options rather than just going on one set playthrough. It's like a social commentary of what happens with visual novel games with you trying to romance all these different options rather than just sticking and playing through one little run, which is what ultimately makes Makoto so fucking miserable in the anime. And something that was pretty unique to this anime and manga was the fact that they released at the same exact time. The manga released volume 1 on July 24th, 2007, with the second volume being posted on November 21st of the same year. This coincided with the release of the anime, which started airing on July 3rd, 2007. It's as if the anime and the manga were made at the same exact time, or published at the same time, for the very fact of the nature that it was a visual novel, which would give the fans two different stories that they could have, which I actually really like, as it lets the people who like the Sakai route or just want to romance Sakai to have the manga as their option or their route, whereas the other option or the anime route has Katsura ending, which lets people who like Katsura have their ending. As for the conclusion of the anime, it actually was supposed to end on September 13th of 2007, but was subsequently delayed until September 27th, 2007. It was delayed for reasons that we'll kind of get to later, but it was kind of an eerie situation with real life imitating art. As for the anime review, School Days focuses on Makoto Ito, who is enamored with Koto Noa Katsura. It is the beginning of his second semester as a freshman in high school, and he finds himself obsessing over her. Makoto wants to approach her, but instead takes a photo of her while they're on the train and turns it into a screensaver on his phone. Yeah, that definitely isn't weird, snapping photos of random girls on a train. Definitely do that. That's good riz. The reason that Makoto does keep this photo as a screensaver is because it's a good luck charm from an urban legend. While looking at the screensaver, Sakai Sayonji looks and notices it. This prompts Sakai into saying that she'll befriend Katsura to get close to her and help set the two of them up. Until this point, this episode seems like a very standard romantic comedy anime. So people who are unsuspecting of what would happen or didn't read the visual novel are kind of just going into this dark. Sakai introduces Makoto and Katsura to each other and they eat lunch together. Sakai leaves the two of them to talk amongst one another and wingmans pretty well for Makoto here, and things go pretty smoothly at this point. It's at this point that Makoto asks her out successfully and she reveals that she actually really liked Makoto but just didn't know how to respond to his feelings. She states that she's noticed his glances on the train, but just didn't know if he was actually interested. Again, it's pretty standard until Sakai asks Makoto for a favor in return for helping the two of them get together. Okay, so what's her kind of favor? She wants to get wingmaned or just wants something in return? I guess that's perfectly normal, or I guess, wait a minute. Sakai leans over and kisses Makoto. She then boards the train and fights back tears. Okay, I see what's going on here. We're given our first and principal love triangle for School Days, which focuses on Makoto, Sakai, and Katsura. The second episode starts with Makoto and Katsura on their first date together as they visit the arcade and go out to eat at a cafe. This first date is the catalyst for the entire rest of the show, as Makoto showers Katsura with praise and affection, only for her to not reciprocate. He love bombs her and she just doesn't know how to respond. When he does get rejected, he kind of internalizes everything and starts to become a total sociopathic incel. It should be noted that while Makoto appears to have fun, Katsura does not, with Makoto trying to end the date off with a kiss before the train doors close, leaving Katsura at the platform all alone. Sakai then comforts Makoto the next day and continues to be his wingman, giving him tickets to a movie. He tells him exactly what to do and how to set a romantic scene. We then see how Sakai is confronted by her friend Setsuna Kiora, who then asks about Sakai giving those tickets to Makoto instead of going with him. Makoto and Katsura go on their second date and see a romantic drama film. Katsura compares the love triangle of Amelia, Chris, and Peter in the movie to their own situation. This is where Katsura confides in Makoto that she finds him cool, just like the character Peter in the movie. He does this while Makoto tries to find an opening to kiss her. He then does try to go in for a kiss and is promptly pimp slapped by Katsura like a pimp named Slickback. The two sit together at a cafe after the movie and talk very awkwardly. The next day, Makoto goes to Katsura at school and apologizes for what happened and says that he'll be waiting for her at the train station. While he waits at the train station, Sakai confronts Katsura and asks what's going on, which Katsura explains that she finds Makoto way too aggressive. He confides in Sakai that she's scared because she has larger breasts and was teased for them when she was younger. If that isn't a harem plot, I don't know what is. Katsura starts to think that Sakai may like Makoto during this conversation, leading her to leave to go find him. She arrives at the train station and Makoto is still waiting for her. Sora grips Makoto's hand and then kisses him. We then see the silhouette of another girl at the train station, watching this go down before the episode ends. The powers of deduction can reveal that this is probably Sakai, and it obviously is. The next episode opens up with Makoto and Katsura talking on the phone, with Katsura saying her sister wants to meet her boyfriend. Her phone screen being a photo of her and Makoto shows just how much she does feel for him. Again, at this point, her emotions are more important to her than the physical aspect of the relationship, with her love language more so being like quality time or words of affirmation, whereas Makoto's is more so love language of touch. Katsura is then bullied by some classmates for running off with her boyfriend. This bullying has her questioning whether her relationship with Makoto is even real, even asking him just that. The leader of the bullies, Otome Kato, will be a part of Makoto's romantic web, with the two of them being friends from middle school. This could be seen as a reason why Kato is bullying Katsura in the first place. Makoto tries to console Katsura physically, which he's visibly put off with, and she rushes off the train, leaving him alone once again. He does realize a few moments later what she's actually done, with a friend of Sakai's, Hikari Kuroda, seeing the entire interaction and then texting Sakai about it, which obviously Sakai berates Makoto about it. The next day, Katsura doesn't show up for the train and takes the bus instead, worrying Makoto. They meet up for lunch though, and Makoto asks if it was wrong for him to hug her. They do agree to a date on Sunday though for Makoto to meet Katsura's sister. Iora goes to talk with Sakai at her job and asks if there's really nothing going on with Makoto, to which she continues to lie and say that she's not interested. Makoto meets Kokoro, Katsura's sister, and they spend the day together. Kokoro notices how Makoto refers to his sister as Katsura, to which she proceeds to stare off into the distance. These are the bits and pieces that show that Katsura's guard is up. Again, her physical intelligence or physical romance has not been developed yet because she hasn't had that kind of nature or relationship. Makoto and Katsura walk together where they refer to each other by their first names, and they have a nice moment together. At the train station, Makoto leans in for a kiss on the lips, to which Katsura surprises him and plants a kiss on his cheek. This rejection is the last straw for Makoto. When he gets home, he calls Sakai and says that he's tired of hanging out with Katsura. For the anime, this is the turning point of the story. Makoto continues to love bomb on Katsura, to which she doesn't know how to respond because, again, she hasn't felt this kind of love before. Feeling like he's doing everything in the relationship or putting all the affection into the relationship, he essentially just gives up because he isn't getting anything reciprocated. He starts to explain why to Sakai at the beginning of episode 4, but then we're cut off by the intro, which is probably the most awkward part of the series, of anime specifically, because it cuts off to the intro and then the next time we see Makoto, he's making out with Katsura on the roof. Katsura recoils when Makoto just gropes her boob and she says she isn't ready, and then he looks disappointed and is just kind of shaming Katsura for not being interested in the physical stuff whatsoever. He's essentially losing interest just because she's not interested in the sexual stuff. Makoto is then dismissive of Katsura on the train, so much so that she doesn't invite him out on a date that she has tickets for.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Makoto and Sakai talk about how he isn't paying attention to how women are supposed to be treated or how they want to be treated, which she then offers to practice doing stuff with him. You know, I might just be speaking out of turn here, but I think the one thing that women might not want is to be cheated on. That's definitely not how you treat a woman. The two of them try to find several areas to make out and practice, but to no avail. That is until the two of them, Makoto and Sakai, go to the top of that roof and cop a feel, and he cheats on his girlfriend and says that he wants Sakai. Now, this is a moment where I'm kind of confused on what actually happens here because there's a message that's sent back to Katsura's phone, but then we don't actually see what happened with Makoto and Sakai. I don't know if they went all the way or if they just made out and did a little bit of shenanigans here, but I do think that they are just making out, and then in the next episode, that's when they actually consummate the relationship. It's still bad, it's still cheating, but they don't go all the way in this episode. With that being said, before they go all the way, Katsura sends a message that essentially interrupts them, and Makoto says that he wants to continue trading with Sakai, which she obviously declines and says that he should do it instead with Katsura. When Sakai does turn and walk away from the conversation though, we can see her smile fade away, showing her true feelings and how she feels about the matter. This is then further confirmed as we watch as Katsura asks Makoto to go on a date to a water park where Sakai watches from a distance while frowning. Listen, at this point, as a married man, I do not fuck with Makoto at any point. Listen, if there's a million people who hate Makoto, I'm probably one of them. If there's 1,000 people, I'm definitely one of them. If there's only one of them, I'm him. And if there's no haters of Makoto, I'm probably dead. Listen, at this point, his actions and behavior are those of a boy, not a man. And that's a very clear distinction. Listen, there's a bunch of ecchi and harem shows, but the thing is, those are like open relationship or a series of things like that. This is just blatantly cheating. There's a complete overhaul of morality in this series. Say what you will, there's a bunch of series like telenovelas and dramas that rely on cheating as a plot point. And don't get me wrong, in fiction, obviously, it works. It kind of builds a story. But in real life, affairs and cheating in that manner is something that I just do not fuck with at all. For that reason, that's probably why I do love this show more than other people, because I hate cheating as much and I get as emotionally invested as I do because of that notion. Which honestly is kind of like the whole fucking point that the anime is trying to make, that cheating and this kind of obsession or all these relationships are inherently screwed. Back to the series though, as episode 5 opens up on the water park date, Katsura reveals that she can't swim to Makoto, to which he promptly helps her learn how to do so. He slips and falls into his embrace, but we see how his eyes are filled with guilt or a lack of interest. He clings onto her because he doesn't want to let her go, but at the very same time, he's doing stuff with Sakai. We also see Sakai then eavesdropping again and then swimming away. Shortly after, we see Makoto then grip Sakai's ass and ask to do more practice, to which she declines. While the group eats together, you can see how Makoto continues to be dismissive of his girlfriend. Iora notices how Sakai is looking, and she starts to put the pieces together of what's going on. Sakai and Makoto talk again, with Sakai stating that they're friends, nothing more and nothing less, as well as to forget about what they did. Now that Katsura is being overly affectionate after Makoto is essentially cheated, he's the one that's disinterested. Katsura walks away from Makoto at the train station, where she embraces the breast that Makoto had squeezed after he accidentally grabs her when she slipped in the pool. Again, there's these small little details that kind of let you know what's going on, especially with her on the bus, leaning on his shoulder, and now being more affectionate. This is her effort to try and be more affectionate physically towards Makoto, which again, he's just disinterested now. Just after this, Makoto starts to blow up Sakai, thirsty as all hell. He then goes to her station and says that he likes her. He then goes as far as to say that Katsura doesn't matter to him. The two embrace and kiss in the rain. Makoto and Sakai go back to her house, and the two go all the way, with him cheating fully on Katsura. This ends episode 5, and if I wasn't pissed before, I'm essentially seething at this point, which just essentially keeps going on, with episode 6 starting off with Sakai stating that she can continue to do this as long as it's practice. Again, whatever the fuck that means. Makoto kisses Sakai out in the open, as if it's okay for him to be blatantly cheating this wide open. All the while, Katsura waits for him at the train station and is eager to see him. The series at this point is like nails on a chalkboard for me, with the cheating provoking a very strong emotional response from me. So much so that I hyperfocus so much and explain in great detail after binging the entire show to my wife, just blurting all of my thoughts and being like, what the fuck just happened? Sakai's emotions kind of come together, and she tries to stop the relationship and wants to tell Katsura, to which Makoto obviously tries to stop her. What makes this even worse is the fact that Katsura is trying her very best to make Makoto happy. The way this scene is framed, positioning Makoto and Sakai on one side and Katsura by herself, is actually amazing storytelling, as the two juxtapose each other, with Makoto and Sakai overcome with guilt and Katsura trying to actively work on a relationship, blissfully unaware. It also positions Makoto in the middle, showing a clear emotional tug of war between the two women. I would argue that this is probably the best framing and kind of shots that are used within the series, and I actually think that for mid-2000s anime, it looks pretty fucking good. Shortly after, Katsura sees Sakai lean in and kiss Makoto while she's on the train, and it passes by them. At this moment, I'm jumping for joy, hoping that she'll finally do something. But even then, she gives Makoto the benefit of the doubt, something that she also does in the manga. Katsura and Makoto walk together, and she notices a 2-for-1 cell phone deal where she says she'll give him one as a present. Makoto declines, and now Katsura is on her feels, and she trips over, to which Makoto shows pretty much no concern for her. Makoto is so dismissive of Katsura, I have no idea why a woman would want to be with a guy like this. I say that, but what has happened here is Makoto love bombing Katsura into a place where she feels like she can't live without Makoto. And then what he does is manipulate her into thinking that she's the one in the wrong for not doing physical or wanting to do physical stuff in the relationship. So much so that Katsura does everything in her power to course correct all the way to the other side to try and make sure that his physical needs are met. Or I'm just reading too much into it and I'm losing my mind because I've spent the last month looking at a fucking visual novel adaptation, the manga, and then the visual novel. Makoto then starts caressing Sakai while they're at school, and they head to the roof to try and get it on. Katsura hurriedly runs up to the roof to meet up with her boyfriend, where Sakai says that she loves Makoto, and he reciprocates, to which Katsura obviously hears. It should be noted at this time that Katsura is trying to learn how to knit, and that she has these red balls of yarn. The balls of yarn are a clear allusion to the red thread of fate. This is an East Asian custom that says that two people are destined to be lovers by the red string of fate. This suggests that she sees Makoto as her soulmate, but the yarn unraveling down the stairs is a metaphor for how her relationship is coming undone, but still joined together as it hasn't been cut yet. This is further shown as she unravels the red thread that she's been using to try and knit something for Makoto, as she tries to take away the thread but doesn't cut it. She just carefully goes through it one by one. That ends the episode, and the most notable thing to start us off in episode 7 is that Kiora blocks Katsura on Makoto's phone. Katsura finds this out when she tries to call him, and I could honestly kill him at this point. There's also a fleeting moment where we see a slight glimpse of a video camera. To the unsuspecting eye, this would just seem like a very weird scene to have, but it's actually really solid foreshadowing by School Days. The video camera is actually this series' Chekhov's gun, and again, the intense foreshadowing is going to come into play for the upcoming episode. Katsura sits in the rain and she talks to Makoto while soaked, and he only shows interest because he can see through her white shirt. Essentially, this kind of dilemma is that because he doesn't have her now, he wants her. But again, it's just this weird back and forth. Even still, Katsura says that Makoto and her haven't broken up. Makoto eavesdrops on this conversation, and one of Sakai's friends calls Katsura a bitch. He runs away, and Makoto looks visibly annoyed at this girl for this. He then proceeds to unblock her while he's on the train. Sakai confronts Makoto about this at his house, to which Katsura then shows up at his front door. He is clearly still in love with him, and she even gives him the benefit of the doubt when he's just actually blocked her with the help of Kiora. Two very important things happen at this point though, with Katsura noticing Sakai's shoes and saying that she's leaving. Sakai says that she's also going to go home after eavesdropping on Katsura and his conversation. Much to the dismay of Sakai, Katsura is still outside of Makoto's apartment complex and notices her leaving before she pimp slaps her, saying that Sakai tricked her. Instead of placing the blame on Makoto, she deflects and puts it onto Sakai, which is actually what happens at the ending of the manga. The only true victim at this point or in the anime is Katsura, but you also don't really blame Sakai for what's going on as she's been manipulated by Makoto. To get back at Makoto and kind of help Sakai, Kiora cockblocks Katsura and him by saying that he has to stay for the planning committee. Makoto then goes to Sakai's house and they talk about what they're doing is bad, to which Makoto makes a move on her and pushes her over. He pushes him off of her, and this guy is like honestly the biggest piece of trash. This rejection is the catalyst that shows us a pattern of behavior that Makoto displays, something that we'll discuss a little later in the video. Episode 8 continues along with us getting the backstory between Kiora and Makoto. Up until this point, she's been seen as Sakai's best friend and even goes to bat for her. Yeah, that notion that I just stated goes right out the window soon after, as she kisses a sleeping Makoto, changing the love triangle into a love square. Even worse is the fact that Katsura sees Kiora do this and the fact that Makoto is sleeping. Episode 9 begins with Katsura confronting Kiora for this and essentially blackmails her into how she kissed Makoto. Makoto then makes moves on Sakai, who rejects him once again. This prompts him to start acting sweet on Kato, who is one of the bullies that's harassing Katsura. It's almost as if looks are everything for him, and there's nothing beyond that surface level assessment. That truth becomes a reality, with Makoto cheating on her with Kato in a back room. We then see how Sawanaga then tells Katsura that he loves her, and he embraces her while Makoto and Sakai dance at the festival. That ends an otherwise uneventful episode 9, but I can't even begin to think what's going on in Makoto's mind. Listen, if he truly does care for Sakai, then why does he cheat on her with someone other than Katsura? Well, the reasoning kind of stems from the very reason that he cheated on Katsura. It's the fact that he's being rejected and he's denied this affection, so he goes to someone else that will provide it for him. When Makoto's advances are rejected, he shifts his focus onto people that will accept it. The best thing to kind of connect this to in real life is affection deprivation. Katsura, on the other hand, vehemently maintains that she's still dating Makoto, even when asked by her bullies, but it's at this point that we should notice a tonal shift in Katsura. Katsura interrupts Makoto and Kiora as they talk, to which Katsura then threatens to reveal what happened with the first kiss, to which Kiora just openly goes ahead and kisses Makoto in front of Katsura. Even still, Katsura can't process this as fact, with Makoto just dismissing her to her face. He tries to muster up the words to say that he's sorry, but he can't do it, instead saying that he doesn't like Katsura anymore. Just after this, we see Makoto with Kato once again. Yeah, this man's a pure-blooded sociopath. Kiora overhears Makoto and Kato doing this stuff together, and at some point you'd think that someone would take matters into their own hands and do something, which is pretty much what's being set up with some intense foreshadowing with Katsura. Kiora then goes over to Makoto's where he puts the moves on her. This man's like a dog at this point, pumping literally everything that moves in his direction. Remember the camera that I mentioned earlier though? Well, the bullies actually hid it in the kissing booth area, and they show footage of a hidden camera which reveals how Makoto cheated on Sakai with Kato. Sakai tries to call him, and we see a passing Kiora on the train, suggesting the two of them had done something together. Again, this shot specifically with the train going past one another is a pretty wonderful shot and a hidden gem from the anime.
Pure chaos!
Before Sakai can get to Makoto's, Katsura intercepts her. Her body movement is noticeable, with her hands clutching her bag and twitching. When she looks up, all life looks to have faded from her eyes. Episode 11 opens with yet another girl sleeping with Makoto. This is actually Hikari, who is the friend of Sakai that we briefly mentioned before. Again, this comes out of nowhere in the anime, but for mediums such as visual novels, it makes sense that there would be multiple avenues and multiple girls. So for Hikari in the visual novel, it makes sense that they would want to adapt it for the anime, and they just threw in all the different girls in this anime adaptation. But because they decided to do it like this, they just made Makoto look like a fuckboy, which is what makes us not empathize with him or enjoy the character whatsoever. What is the most psychologically wrecking is the fact that we see Katsura alone at a playground talking to her phone as if she's talking to Makoto. She says all the things that she wants to do with him, only for us to realize that she's just been speaking to a dial tone because she's been blocked again. Her eyes, again, are the most notable thing here, with them being very devoid of color. The other three bullies from Kato's group head over to his house where they also randomly sleep with him in a four-way. Again, this further shows that Makoto just doesn't care for anyone but himself, specifically in this format of the anime. A reclusive Sakai pukes and grips her stomach, something that indicates that she's pregnant. She goes to school to talk with Makoto and says that she hasn't had her period yet. Even still, Makoto is dismissive, which forces the hand of Sakai, who decides to air out her business to everybody. This rumor spreads like a wildfire, and Katsura overhears this news, and she's obviously distraught. Kato goes over for a booty call with Makoto, to which he shows his vile side to her. This prompts Kato to leave, saying that Makoto was a lot nicer in middle school. Makoto, who had access to everyone, now has access to no one, as Hikari calls Sakai, saying that he won't go around her man again. We notice how Katsura continues to call Makoto's discontinued line, living in her own delusional world. For me, what this reads like is that she's suffering from DID, or dissociative identity disorder, which she's living in her own delusions and truly thinks that she's still dating Makoto at this point. From a psychoanalytical perspective, this is the most, reasonable thing to kind of go with. By pure blind luck and looking at the photo he took of Katsura, she's there at the same exact place, as they're in the same place at the same time. Mentally wrecked Katsura is clearly out of it, saying that she will become a better girlfriend for him. It is only until Makoto says that he loves her that the color returns to her eyes, and the two embrace with episode 11 ending on Katsura's smile. Before we talk about episode 12, it's kind of important to talk about why it was delayed. The day that the episode was supposed to air, a 16-year-old girl actually decapitated her father in Japan, which really heavily mirrored what happens in the 12th episode. So to avoid any controversy, they pushed the airing a week back, which kind of seems fair. Honestly, it's probably smart they did this anyway, as episode 12 of the series contains probably the most controversial episode of any anime, except for maybe Redo of Healer episode 1 and Goblin Slayer episode 1. Sakai calls Makoto asking why he isn't coming home, and she's kind of right on the money with her intuition as she realizes that he's trying to cheat again. Sakai states that she's carrying his baby, to which Makoto says that Katsura wouldn't say something like that. Makoto is selfish, not caring for Sakai in the least, blaming her for getting pregnant, not taking any responsibility for his part in that role. Sakai leaves his house and comes back, only to slap Katsura across the face. He tells Katsura to leave, which prompts probably one of the most unhinged crash outs of anime history. Katsura starts laying into Sakai, saying that Kiora liked Makoto and aired out everything. She proceeds to cozy up to Makoto, with the two then making out in front of Sakai, which is just pure insanity. We see a distraught and broken Sakai, and at this point, it's anyone's guess to what will happen. Yeah, Makoto messaging Sakai to get an abortion at a clinic Katsura knows was not on the top of my list of things to expect. This was something that completely took me off guard, and I completely forgot that this had happened. This prompts Sakai to invite Makoto over, and the horror in this moment is fantastic. A kettle of tea starts to slowly become louder and louder as Makoto checks a string of texts from Sakai, which all say sorry. That is until the final sorry, which says goodbye, and the kettle stops, with Sakai plunging a knife into Makoto. The insanity that Katsura had displayed before has now switched over to Sakai, which is actually something that is shown in the manga as well, with the two of them both becoming unhinged to try and be with him. The only difference being that Makoto in the manga actually takes responsibility for his actions and has a feeling of guilt in regards to what he's been doing. Sakai only stops after Makoto lays his hand on her stomach. Whether he actually cares for the child is unknown, but Sakai stops stabbing him and looks at his lifeless body. The kettle whistles and she runs away, with Katsura finding his body. Say what you want about the melancholic parts about School Days, the horror and drama is done amazingly. Makoto has supposedly lived through the stabbing, sending Sakai a message to meet on the school roof. Little do we know that this isn't actually Makoto, but Katsura, who is crashing out and says that Sakai isn't actually pregnant. Now that Makoto is dead, Katsura's eyes are just as lifeless as before. We know that he is dead as Sakai is prompted to look inside of the duffel bag and is obviously horrified. It's important to say that we don't actually see what's in the bag, but we can infer that it's probably Makoto's head because of how Katsura has his head when she's at the end of the show. Sakai tries to stab Katsura, to which it doesn't work whatsoever. Katsura stabs her in the gut and says that Sakai was lying and that there wasn't actually a baby inside of her. This angle is absolutely nuts, but is one of the most iconic and infamous in horror anime history. The ending of the episode sees Katsura clutching Makoto's head on a boat, sailing into the sunrise where she says they can finally be alone. And quite frankly, this series is insanity. While being a somewhat standard romantic dramedy for the first 8 episodes, the last 4 devolve into absolute chaos with the actions of Makoto plaguing those around him. Some may criticize Sakai for being a homewrecker, to which I have to say that respectfully, it's all Makoto's fault. While he is slightly manipulated by Sakai, his selfish thinking corrupts all of the people around him. To that effect, Katsura and Sakai are victims, manipulated by the man that they thought once loved them. School Days, while otherwise being a pretty standard romantic comedy anime, is elevated by the usage of psychological horror. This is what makes it stand out in comparison to other anime of the mid-2000s. This is why I think it's one of the more underrated shows of anime history, with it being lost to the sands of time. Its usage of foreshadowing and framing, or paneling, is something that's super underappreciated and makes it that mid-2000s hidden gem. Listen, do I think that School Days is a masterpiece? A 10 out of 10? Hell no, but I definitely do think it deserves something higher than a 5 out of 10. And I say this because I think that the show is a diamond in the rough, with the ability to empathize with the women of the show very strong, as well as the horror elements that were done very well. It had the ability to elevate other visual novels of the time with its innovations within that industry. I think that it deserves a fair shake and a rewatch after what has been almost 20 years. Not one person will sit here and tell you that they liked Makoto, but you will have people that say that they empathize with Sakai and Katsura in the anime. With that being said, School Days is a relic of the lost generation of anime, to which I think that the newer audience that have come in through recent shows such as Demon Slayer and Attack on Titan should go back and rewatch this kind of, underappreciated show of the time. With the countless bland romantic comedy shows that just play everything straight and by the book, I think that there's only ever going to be one School Days. And instead of giving us a bland and generic good ending from a visual novel anime adaptation, they decided to do something completely different, which was audacious and bold of them. And I think that by taking risks and doing this kind of interesting way of not having the good ending happen, I think it deserves some praise in itself. I've been Siren Zen, and let me know what you thought about the video. This took, I don't know, pretty decent amount of time here. What series would you like to see me review? Because honestly, I only really did this through a couple of DMs that had asked me through Discord to review School Days, and I think I honestly had a blast. Make sure to subscribe if you're new with notifications. We did really well with the Rick and Morty video and a couple other videos, and I just appreciate y'all for all of that. So thank you guys for helping me hit 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and 9,000 subscribers in the past month here. So seriously, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for all the recent support, and I will see you guys in the next video.